Hello, friends. Welcome to another edition of Tarot Tuesday. I'm Alam from Six Silver Seals, and this is the reading for the period that begins on October 6th, 2020. And the aspect that we're going to talk about actually takes place on October 7th, but this gives you kind of a run into what's going to be going on with it, because it does involve Mercury, who on the 13th, and we'll talk about that in that video, will be going retrograde. But right now it is direct, and it will be direct for this aspect as well, in Scorpio. And so when we have Mercury and Scorpio playing together, what we have is the Magician and Death. And this is a really interesting confluence of energies because, as we've discussed frequently, the Magician kind of is this card where the energy is that of having all the tools you need at your disposal to do whatever it is that you've set your mind to doing. But coupling that with death means that what you set your mind to doing is to change, to evolve, to transform. It is a card of very personal endings and beginnings. This is sort of how the dichotomy between death and the Tower is that death is personal and the Tower is more widespread. But with the opposition to Uranus and Taurus, which is a planet currently in retrograde, we have those cards in reverse. So we have the Fool reversed for Uranus and the Hierophant reversed for Taurus. And so on the one hand, it is this thing of changing and transforming, and it seems more that Uranus and Taurus is kind of this resistance to change, which is a very interesting thing to be saying about Uranus, the card of rebellion and iconoclasm and change for change's sake. We're not getting that from Uranus this time. What we are getting from Uranus, again, a retrograde Uranus opposite the motion of Mercury, feels more like this kind of intense resistance to the change, something that won't budge, something that won't give. And since Mercury is about to go retrograde, it's one of these things where it seems like what it's illuminating is something that's going to take sustained work to change. Mercury likes to do things quickly, and it's running into something that cannot be done with speed. Rather, what we're really looking to get out of this, most likely, is going to be the changes we need to make to ourselves in order to effect that change that is external. The thing that won't budge is external. And again, with Taurus, there is the Hierophant. A lot of it is going to have to revolve around what is normal, what is usual, what is the status quo, whether that's for us or for something that we're involved in. Now, as we change ourselves to sort of suit the larger growth we're headed towards, again, that larger growth is also going to be like the obstacle. That's really just a frame of reference. We'll go through the cards here in just a second, but particularly the thing that I want to drive home is that, we have to orient ourselves around this larger obstacle. Part of it also feels like what we're kind of doing is sounding the difficulty of this greater change that is ahead by making these incremental ones up front. It's a very confusing energy. We're both drastically changing, as is common with the Death card, and yet those changes are made with an eye to a greater change, which makes them feel smaller than they might actually be. So there's a lot of moving parts to the energy of this opposition, which again will not be taking place until the day after today. So the sun is still in Libra for a little while longer, and we'll begin there. And for Libra, we have the Lovers, the card of your fellow air sign in Gemini. And so Libra is the first of the signs to begin to connect to the external. If you remember, Libra is the natural ruler of the 7th house, which is the first house that involves somebody else, but it does involve the closest one-on-one relationships. And so with the Lovers kind of lending their energy to you, Libra, what we're getting here is this is a big change in a relationship. Preparing yourself for the next step up, whatever the next step up might be. Whether that's, and that's just it. The step up could be anything. the end of a relationship, the reinforcement of a current one. There's no clear cut improvement here. Like, it's not very obviously like, oh, you're gonna get married, or oh, you and your partner are gonna decide to have kids, or whatever the case may be. But whatever it is, I do feel ultimately is to your benefit. It will be good for you. But again, we're making these changes to these one-on-one relationships, and it didn't even necessarily be romantic. But we're making these changes, Libra, to your one-on-one relationship with the eye to moving something greater as a result of this. You're making this change now to make a greater change in the not too distant future. Remember that from the astrology reading that we've done at the beginning of this. You are working with an eye to something else on your approach to your relationships. For Scorpio, we have the Five of Wands. And there's a much more playful energy to this than normally I get, because the Five of Wands is one of those cards where it's just like, typically it's petty brawling, right? It's fights over things that don't matter. It's not important. This is more playful in nature than that. Like, there's something recreational to this. Like, it almost, this feels more like sparring. It's fighting, but not really. And again, the notion of making changes for the sake of making greater changes is kind of this thing of, like, sort of going through the motions of what that's like. For whatever reason, this card gives me the feeling, Scorpio, that whatever changes you're going through around Tuesday and Wednesday are just like the feelers of the change you will go through as the Uranian obstacle makes itself more well known. But it seems like so far, unless something comes up in a later signs draw, you are going to have the most direct sense of what comes next based on what you're doing right now, Scorpio. For Sagittarius, we have the Nine of Cups. And those of you who have been with the channel for a while have probably heard me talk about this as the wish fulfillment card. So with the Nine of Cups, Sagittarius, I talk about this all the time as the wish fulfillment card. It's less like the wish fulfillment card than normal, though. This time it's more of an energy of, like, it's not getting what you want, but it's changing what you want. Understanding that the things you need and the things that you desire are not the things that you used to, or need to not be the things that they used to be. You're growing and changing. That means your needs and desires change with you. If you're not the you that you used to be, how can you want and need the same things? Is kind of the energy that I'm getting. And what's interesting about this is that the other feeling I'm picking up on this is that understanding that your needs and wants are different than they used to be will help you become a different person than you used to be and than you currently are at the time that you begin to make those changes. It feels like you're realigning with growth that you've been unaligned from for quite some time. But in that sense, the Nine of Cups is giving you what you wanted in the abstract rather than what you wanted in the concrete details. So Capricorn has the Fool, and there's kind of a poetic irony to the fact that Uranus is appearing for you, Capricorn, given that Uranus is in its most Saturn-esque shape right now, in retrograde and opposite the prime mover, which for this reading's purposes is Mercury, because you always, or at least maybe not always, but one of the things that can be said of Capricorns very often is that they identify with their obstacle and struggle because they're the sign most closely in pursuit of success. Capricorn rules the natural 10th house, and so career success is big for them. Very, very big for them. Very, very big for you. And with the Fool here, this is in one sense, this is a thing that is brand new. You are welcoming something totally different into your world than was there previously, and yet a lot of this energy is going to feel very familiar to you because we also have the Fool reversed in the astrology with Uranus being retrograde. And so on the one hand, it almost feels like what you're really getting here is a brand new way of looking at the same problem, something that you had not been able to step outside yourself and consider before. But it's in, again, trying to sort of chip your way around the bigger obstacle that you find all these other ways of approaching it. So it's again, as I talked about in the astrology portion at the beginning of this, it's about orienting yourself relative to the obstacle rather than relative to tackling it. Like the Mercury energy is coming in at least for a little while, for the next week while it's in its shadow. And so we're really just looking to chip away at this boulder because with Mercury retrograde, we are dealing with not being able to start new things. The less work you do now, the harder this retrograde will be on you when it finally comes, Capricorn. So for Aquarius, we have the Ace of Cups. And like your cousins, your fellow air signs in Libra, this has to do with your emotional connections, but where Libra is reifying or modifying or working with existing emotional connections in some way, Aquarians are going to be dealing with new emotional connections, and specifically new emotional connections that illuminate what makes it so difficult for y'all to form them. And this is not just because Aquarians do have the reputation for being emotionally aloof, although that probably does play into this for some of you, but mostly just, it's shining a light on your old hurts and your past wounds and the things that make love of any kind a little bit uncomfortable for you. To feel vulnerable or exposed or anything like that. This is for those of you with hardened hearts, this might be a pretty difficult thing to deal with. And Mercury retrograde is, I get the feeling that since aces are beginnings, Mercury retrograde is only going to exacerbate those for you since it's going to be retrograde in Scorpio for most of the time. But it is dealing with your emotional stuff. So, again, orient yourself from the blockage. And I'm always going to caution everybody, not just you, not to run from the energy when what it's doing is trying to do things that will help you. Another ace. For Pisces, we have the Ace of Pentacles. And so where your neighbors in Aquarius are dealing with new emotional connections, you're dealing with new physical forces. What a timing for that, too. Right before Mercury goes retrograde, dealing with new responsibilities at work, maybe a new job, the move to a new home. But again, like just new physical things, and it's about to be a whole bunch of obstacles, right? And they're all coming down the pike because all of these things are the sorts of thing they tell you not to do while Mercury is retrograde, and you're doing it now so that by the time the retrograde comes, again, I think we said this before, you can chip away at it and get ready for it. This was with Capricorn. You can chip away at this and get ready for it. Sort of dig out that stone because by the time Mercury retrograde comes, you'll have done some of the work of starting to dislodge it. And you can continue it safely since you're not starting it from scratch, starting it from nothing. Again, just this air of something that's going to be like it starts now and it kind of bleeds through Mercury retrograde, which we will, of course, talk about next week. It does happen on Tuesday. But on the whole, like new things coming, but again, the ball is in your court to make this happen. It's a raise or a promotion or a new job or a new home or whatever new physical material thing that you need to pursue. The avenue is there, but if you don't go at it with the notion that going for this will allow you to make further changes after the fact, the energy is going to go by you without any change. For Aries, we have the High Priestess. Something internal is catalyzing for you, Aries Suns, out there. Because the High Priestess is the mistress of her inner world. Mastering the intuition, mastering the emotions, mastering the psychic senses, but all of these things that are internal and interior and one's own, right? The inner self, the innermost self, possibly even the shadow. But again, the work you're doing is with an eye to a greater work, right? You're making you. Not even making. It almost feels like you've been doing this. You've been making you the you that you need to be to handle an external work. Because that's what the High Priestess illuminates and makes clear here. Something external to you needs doing, and you needed something else to be ready to do that external thing. You needed to make yourself strong enough to move mountains before you could actually go find mountains to move. So it's a catalyst, right? It turns you from, I am doing this interior work to make a better me, into, I have made the better me. Now this, this sharper knife that I am is ready to cut the thing that needs cutting, so to speak. Again, you have to be careful with those metaphors, because if all you have is a knife, every problem looks like something that needs to be cut. If all you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. You've grown beyond that, Aries, and it's time to take that growth and apply it to the thing that needed fixing, to the external thing that needs fixing. For Taurus, we have the Eight of Wands. And for you, Taurus, this is going to be a question of how you handle speed. Things are going to proceed very, very rapidly from this point. Things are really about to kick off, which is a weird thing to say. Mercury retrograde, at least for me personally, although I'm sure many of you can agree, is one of those things where it feels like time just really slows down for those 3 weeks. Every day feels like an eternity. And in 2020, we've kind of already been living there. So I don't really see how that could get worse. But for you, this is going to be one of those things where Mercury retrograde kind of feels the opposite of it normally does. Everything will feel like it's going by so quickly that it's almost hard to handle. I get the feeling that you come into this from a position of strength, though. There is something to this for you, Taurus, that is like you're operating from a position of power to begin with, but you really kind of have to dig in and be ready to charge when things start to move. And so this is going to be one of those things where the thing that you need to do is one of those things that's the most difficult for you, which is just to get started. The ball is rolling with or without you. The bandwagon, the train is leaving the station, and if you don't jump on it, you will be left behind. Is kind of the energy that I'm picking up on from this. For Gemini, we have the Hanged Man. Perspective shift. Now this is an interesting one because Gemini are often, they're folks of two minds about something. You've always got two mental trains running at the same time, and so to talk about looking at things from another perspective is interesting because you're always looking at everything through at least two lenses rather than just one, or most of the time, Gemini. You're looking at things through more than one lens as kind of for some of you it's a character trait, for some of you it's just a default mode of being, but either way, this speaks of thirds. And what I mean by that is that when you take one, it's a dot. And if you take two, it's a line, right? There's a line between them, but they're opposites. Then there's three, and three introduces the first closed shape, which is the triangle. But there's a mediating point to go along with every opposition. And you have the 2 points already, but you need this third one. This third one that is in reference to both the others but mediates their opposition, and yet allows them, each of those points, to mediate its opposition to the other two. It's a holistic thing. It's a striving towards completeness. All of which is to say that when you exist in this place where you already have two perspectives at once, it can be really, really hard to conceive of a third. And so we have your Uranian obstacle. This thing that will change you is learning to look at it from a perspective that is outside not only your usual perspective, but the usual secondary perspective that you also cultivate. For Cancer, we have the Star. And the Star is the card of omens, but for you, Cancer, I get the feeling that this is going to be much more long-lasting for you than it is for any other sign so far. We've talked about how for some people this is just the prelude to Mercury retrograde, and for some other sun signs, this is the warming up before like the orchestral performance that is Mercury retrograde, and those are two different things, right? For some people, this is a segue to Mercury retrograde. For other people, it's the lead-in. The difference between a prologue and an intermission, if you like. For you, all of this goes until Mercury is no longer in Scorpio. And I don't mean when Mercury retrogrades back into Libra. I mean the other way. When Mercury finally enters Sagittarius in quite some time from now. You're going to be holding on to this for most of the rest of the year, Cancer. But it is a sign of things to come. Having said that, it means that you're going to be going through some seismic shifts. I do get the feeling that this is probably because of lots of changes. Like, there's no single front to point to, right? This isn't a card in a suit. It's a major arcana. All of these things in your life are going to be changing, and each one plays into the next. So the advice that I have for you is to hold on tight, find your North Star, and keep following it. No matter how difficult it is, as long as you can see that, you'll know that you're going in the right direction. Because again, lots of things inside of you and around you will be changing, and they feed off of each other. They all play into each other. They all play together. It's something about this feels like a funnel to some really powerful revelation or realization for you, Cancer. You will come out the other side okay, but it might be a little chaotic in the middle. For Leo, we have the King of Cups. And I'm happy to see this card for you because it indicates that what you're trying to do, Leo, is really get a handle on your emotions. Now, again, this is one of those things that sort of makes this week before the retrograde and the retrograde period kind of blend into one another, where, again, it is the prologue to Mercury retrograde and not the intermission between it and something else. But again, like and it's weird because there's something of like a repetitive sort of mirror to this. You're trying to get a handle on your emotions so that you can get a handle on your emotions. Which sounds redundant and repetitive, but I do get the feeling that there is a distinction. Like, there's almost an it's understanding what the tool is for so that you can put it to use. And maybe that's, for some of you, it might be the case that you've never really known what your emotions are for. And in learning what they're for, you can learn what they're doing and then either continue to do some of them or choose to stop doing others. But it is one of those things where you're really trying to get a grasp on, like, okay, not how do I feel, although that is an important question to ask, but why? Why do I feel? You might never have known before, and this next few weeks is going to be illuminating that for you. Last but certainly not least is Virgo, and we have the Eight of Pentacles. And I like the Eight of Pentacles. The Eight of Pentacles is always a very Virgo card to me, because it indicates a level of fastidiousness and industriousness, both of which are very Virgo in traits. Because, like, Is a spider's web uniform and orderly? To a degree, but it's exactly the way the spider wants and needs it. And that's a Virgo thing. It makes the work worth doing because as long as it takes, it still reaps great rewards. And that's the thing. It's just like this is a really keen understanding that's coming to you, Virgo, of what your work is worth, what it's good for, what it's doing, what it's setting you up for in the future. And you already always have an eye to that because of the way that you just go about this methodical kind of thing where everything has to be just so for you. It's just that it almost feels like the just so is what's shifting. You've always had an eye towards a goal. The goal is changing. Which is interesting because rightly or wrongly, Virgos can be accused of getting kind of stuck in their ways a little bit. Because it's got to be their way or the highway, or so people say. But in any case, you're deciding that the way that you've been going needs review. That doesn't mean it will change. But again, doing the things that seem little and incremental in light of the larger goal are actually quite fundamental in nature. And so that's what you're going to find out as you go to reweave your spider web. Was this ever the way that I needed it to be? Because maybe I thought I needed something different than I actually do. But that is Tarot Tuesday for this week. I sincerely hope that you all enjoyed it. If you did, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Remember that patrons on Patreon get access one day early to all of the content on YouTube, which includes these Tarot Tuesday videos, Nixie's Pick-a-Piles, the daily draws that I do on Instagram and Facebook. And until next time, this has been Tarot Tuesday with Alam. Be kind to yourselves and one another.